Welcome, Praetors, to the hard-won lands of the 31st millennium, because today we are talking about the Loyalist host, invaders and defenders of a broken and shattered people, specifically the Loyal host regarding to the siege of Cthonia. As we continue our narrative series talking about this epic campaign book that dropped for Horus Heresy, we covered a video talking about the invading force, the true sons of Cthonia as they are coming at. So I wanted to have an equal discussion about what are our heroes, in my case, my hero, right? I'm, of course, Sons of Horus player. What are our heroes, my heroes, coming at and against when they step onto the soil of Cthonia? And so it's definitely worth a discussion to talk about who the defenders are, what kind of forces are we talking about, and what does the opposition look like in terms of like, what are the odds, right? Are they how outclassed or outnumbered, or what kind of advantages they have? We're going to talk all about that today. Because one of the notable things about this Loyalist host, specifically on Cthonia and the late part of the Heresy, is that it is made up of tons of different legions. That's, of course, a little bit of hyperbole. But all of these shattered legions have some kind of representation. There's Raven Guard here, an Imperial army, Imperial fists, of course, Mechanicum, a bunch of different allies, and so what does that look like when there's a lot of different military minds on both sides look like? But also, you're talking about the fact that all of these different legions have ground space and command on the planet that belongs to a different legion altogether, the ones coming home. So it's about a conquered people who don't like their oppressors, of course, but those oppressors are these stalwart champions meant to repel one of the largest arms of the War Master's war machine coming at and towards Terra. Now, one of the things I want to bring up real quick before I jump into this, if you're interested in this game or anything Horus Heresy, please consider using my affiliate link in the description down below. Noble Knight Games is a great store here in the US, discounts on all GW products, and a ton of hobby supplies because they kind of go wide with their inventory, so if you're looking for any kind of cool little bits or bods to add to your existing collection, stuff you can't get at a local store, go check out Noble Knight Games. Every time you use that link, big or small, it goes directly to supporting me, my wife, our cats, the whole thing. I thank you all so much. And I also want to shout out Goonhammer because they have a fantastic collection of strategy guides, getting started stuff, and just reading material related to Horus Heresy. So if you want to learn more about the game, go check out Goonhammer. So talking about the defenders in this scenario of Cthonia, after Dorn claimed victory over the planet, the one really existing hive city that's here, that was known as Lupercal's Gate, was renamed to Traitors Gate. Basically, the whole planet was put to shame. Everything that bore the War Master's name was changed, of course. The denigration of his heritage and all of that is going on. The city's assets and treasures were all stripped for the ongoing war effort, and its people would either be used as labor in the mines of Cthonia itself, or enlisted in Dorn's Imperial Fist, because the second he touched ground, he started drafting from this populace. Now, one thing that's interesting to point out here is that Imperial Fists, to my knowledge, often collect individuals or aspirants from, like, hive cities, because it's just a brutal kind of warfare that naturally breeds a strong person. Well, that's actually the same environment we have here on Cthonia. This is the one mega hive city, but because most of the resources of the planet are tapped out, this is where the action is, and resources are scarce. It breeds the same kind of harsh people. But that is like an ultimate offense. What is it like when the homecoming party for the Sons of Cthonia rolls up, and all signs of the War Master are removed, and his people are remade as loyal warriors of the Emperor? Now, in charge of all this, there was Lord Castellan Garrius, and he is tasked with this monumental undertaking, but his appointment was seen as censure due to previous failures in battle. Basically, you don't earn the ability to stand before me and like be a moving part of the battle. You're going to go back and do fortification duty. That's the idea. And it's important to know the tenor of this entire defense. These are a shamed group of Imperial Fists, people who were taken off the front lines. This is Garrius and his 456th company were dropped here on Cthonia, and a bunch of other forces were reassigned here from elsewhere because it's just like, we don't know what to do with you, so we'll just throw you on this little backworld planet. Dorn needed more soldiers and resources to defend against Horus's legions, and so garrison forces like this across the segmentum solar, right, everything around Sol or Earth, was being depleted. And loyal planets kept facing all these increased tides. We want more troops, more units, more space marines, more everything, more guns, munitions, all of it for the war effort. And on Cthonia, the remaining loyalists here were largely comprised of the Imperial Fist, as we talk about, and light infantry from nearby Necromunda, which is really a cool thing, I think. However, that alone was going to be nothing to garrison a planet anywhere near Terra, as the hordes of the War Master are coming down towards it. Not to mention, some of these original Sons of Horus that were there when the Imperial Fist came and conquered it the first time retreated to the shadows, and so there kind of already is a shadow war. There's a lot to combat when it comes to weeding out the stain that is War Master Horus from this planet. And this is where we get into the idea of Inductii companies. Now, every legion has Inductii to some extent. Maybe an asterisk next to the Thousand Sons, but even then I don't believe so. And Inductii are really just kind of a catch-all term for any Space Marines or Legionnaires that were created after Istvan and at or before the Siege of Terra, because both sides were just trying to get numbers. We need a numerical advantage, and so Inductii, that catch-all phrase, is Space Marines who were created at a very advanced rate. Maybe they don't get all the training or all the implants or all the everything. Other legions can pick and choose what parts they cut out of their building of a Space Marine to kind of suit their needs. But an example might be something like this. We're going to cut down the amount of mimetic training that this guy gets while he's sleeping. We're going to cut out the lessons about how to drive a rhino or something like that. Basic things that a normal Marine would have the most basic level of access to. Cut out anything that's absolutely not necessary for holding a chainsword and a bolter and running forward. But when you take, your Inductii recruitments from the planet that, is the War Masters, these new Space Marines they created, they had all different temperaments compared to the veterans of the Great Crusade. They're Imperial Fists, but they're not. They're different. They have a different culture, a different kind of warrior ethos. And they seem to just not have the same level of indoctrination when it came to loyalty and things like this. So Garrius from his end is looking at them as a disposable weapon. Okay, these guys exist to get thrown onto the battlefield and just mulched into nothing. I will give them no other course, right? That is their tool, that is their job. To add to that, he starts keeping them away from the traditions of all Chthonian forebears. We're not going to let any kind of insinuation or cultural heritage seep in, because maybe that's where the root of chaos was. We're not quite sure. And because this loyalty to the Emperor was instilled to them through flash doctrination rather than, bonds of friendship and years of war and, all those things that veterans have, it is paper thin, to say the least. Which all sounds like its own trouble that's brewing, but it's funny because it immediately goes after, actually the problem with the Inductii is because they keep getting taken away from him. Right as Horus's fleet is bearing down, a bunch of these Inductii regiments that he and his planet have been cultivating are taken away to go reinforce other sectors. But in exchange, Cthonia receives unexpected windfalls from battle fought across the wider Imperium. So what I mean is, he sent off all of his reinforcements, but then Cthonia kind of became a meeting point for other loyalists to kind of trickle in, and normally, if there was enough time, they probably would have been reassigned or reconstituted as other regiments and redeployed somewhere else, but they happened to be here when the War Master's fleet came. And we have a very interesting group. So we have the Shattered Legions, which are the legions that suffered the worst casualties during the Drop Site Massacre. There's a bunch of representation there of them. But also, one thing I did mention earlier is the remnants of the 5th Fellowship of the Thousand Sons, who had fled Prospero and sought redemption with the Emperor. They were actually there stationed. Now, they are being held at a very long arm's length, but they are pledging allegiance to the Emperor. They think Magnus did something wrong, to reference the meme here. But they are held with a lot of suspicion because one of the characters, Garrius himself, calls them twice traitors, meaning you initially turned against the Emperor and then you as a company turned against your Primarch. And like everything else that is Thousand Sons, I ask the question, how are they ever supposed to win? It just kind of seems like the logic there is always stacked against them. And Garrius basically is using them in a region known as the Pharos Obscurus, and their job is to go look for the remnant sons of Horus and that are kind of scattered amongst the city. That's about root them out. They're basically sending them on like patrol duty. And as the tide of war begins to shift in the Traitors' favor towards the end of the war, as the momentum is building towards Terra, more desperate things, not just the Shattered Legions and stuff, but you also have stuff like when Talorn falls, 3 companies of Imperial Fists and Imperial Army troops fight their way clear and make their way to Cthonia. So we have a trickle of tank reinforcements and Imperial Army. The world of Beta Garmin, the Great Fortress world, also falls, and the scattered Loyalists there of all different stripes and colors start pouring in. And with each of these defeats, Garrius and his warriors receive tales of heroism and defiance that form like the legend that is the Horus Heresy, right? But they themselves are trapped here on Cthonia. They have a few traitors in the planet in the underworlds of Cthonia at their back, and the tip of the spear kind of bearing down on them. And so where our story begins is a point where Cthonia is relatively untouched by battle, despite being absolutely now filled to the brim with warriors gathered from last stands and massacres and stuff. Now, let's step back and talk about why is this cool as a defensive host. Well, one of the things I like about it is it's a great way to include mixed forces that exemplify the Horus Heresy. So here, we have a Loyalist 1,000 Sons army. Every legion, if you don't know, can be either a Loyalist or a traitor. Some of them you have to really think about and come up with a great backstory for why, but they all existed. Loyalist 1,000 Sons sounds awesome. So are the Shattered Legions. If you don't know, Black Library, back when they started the Horus Heresy stuff a while ago, they had a series of black books that came out that were like campaign books and started with the Dropsite Massacre or whatever. And the ones following it shortly after had campaigns that were these Shattered Legions. Like whatever escaped the initial bombardment on Isstvan, they were trying to survive and they were being hunted by Angron across Isstvan, and were eventually rescued, and that's actually how Koroks got off the planet himself. And it's a really great story. The campaign is fun because it actually tracks like how you deplete resources, like you run out of ammunition, and all of a sudden now you just have melee weapons. That's what you got, bro. But what I'm saying is those Shattered Legions have a very desperate character that's been represented in Horus Heresy stuff since the very beginning. So to see them represented everywhere and anywhere is just really fun to me, because they all bring their own backstories, their own hatreds, their own distrusts, depending on what happened to them in those moments. Not only that, this is supposed to be a problem that was solved. We got rid of those legions, and yet they're constantly a pain in Horus's side. There's a lot of different campaigns, or short stories rather, of Shattered Legions just going out and we're just going to hit this spaceport that no one's looking at. It's not necessarily immediately relevant or dangerous, just to take away something from Horus. That's the goal. That's it. It's awesome because we bump into them all over the place. And also, this poses a very interesting kind of background to our attacker and defender mix. Because the True Sons of Cthonia is really a story about veterans wanting to maintain their honor and reclaim their homeworld, because that's what heroes do. It's their cultural heritage, it's their purity, it's their warriors' right, all of that. The defenders, however, are nothing so noble. Garrius is left here with command of a middling force of just extra bits that have flown his way, as a punishment for his failures. And it's constantly getting picked apart for reinforcements, like being taken to other parts of the battlefront. Most of his men are very inexperienced in green, meaning the ones he directly commands, and they just don't have that same level of zeal and intensity, or frankly just experience on what's bearing down on them. Now, over the course of the events in this book, the composition of this army will change, because, like I said, the Inductii are produced so much faster. They must be like the snap build kits of the Horus Heresy, right? Instead of the full squad box. Not all the options are available, but it makes for a very different kind of Imperial Fists army. They're aggressive, they're prone to disorganization, and so defects are possible, specifically regarding the Inductii. And they lack that practical experience, the exact polar opposite, again, of the veterans bearing down on top of them. So for all these things, the Loyalist host is disunified, but it does make for a very compelling set of stories and characters that you can write your narrative into, and that's why I like it. So friends, let me know your thoughts on, is it Lord Castellan Garrius? Are you an Imperial Fist player? Do you have any idea what's coming down on you? My boys are going to bring the heat. I look forward to reading comments down below. Thank you so much, and I will catch you next time. Happy wargaming.